All right, welcome to another episode of the Scripting That podcast. Today I have a great guest, Santosh. He's a Google Dev expert. He is a GitHub Star. He's an open source advocate. He is a very vocal Angular supporter, which is not something that, at least in my timeline, show up very often. So that's also something interesting. So welcome to the show, Santosh. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself a little bit than what I did.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invite. I mean, I'm really happy to be here, and to give you of course, you said few things. I mean, to add, I mean, I'm a senior engineer, senior software engineer at Solomons. That's what I do for living, and I live in Germany, in Hamburg, near Hamburg. And yeah, I mean, I love talking about Angular. Yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, and Angular was the technology where I started contributing to open source, and then it changed my life. So of
Okay.
course I have close attachment.
All right. That's fair. That's fair. All right, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. We're, we're here to talk about your journey essentially through open source. I've been, online you hear a lot about people like claiming that contributing to open source is beneficial for a developer, for the career of a developer. Um, but at least in my case, I've never felt like getting started into open source was an easy thing to do. Um, so I know you did. I know you did well, and as you said, it changed your life. So I want to kind of understand your journey through it, your background, and see what we can get, kind of what advice we can get for you developers looking into open source and seeing it as an opportunity, so they don't die trying, essentially. So let's start with the beginning. How did you get started with open source, and what was that experience like?
As you said, right? So it's not easy. I mean, I still agree. It's not for everyone. I mean, you may see some influencers saying, do open source," but believe me, it's not for everyone. I mean, and it was hard to get started as well because it was close to. I think it was around 2018 that I promised myself that I would do it. But why? Of course, it has a backstory. So I started my like started working as a software engineer early in 2008 9, and when I started, of course I was in .NET, so I had no idea about what open source is, and then because of course right, .NET is was actually a closed source technology, and
Mm-hmm.
now it's not, so it's open source. But I was mostly into .NET, so I had no idea, and then I kept like switching jobs, and then finally I realized, okay, I don't want to do .NET anymore because, of course, it's been quite a year, and then I'm looking. I was looking to explore something new, and I came across Angular, and so I started. I moved to another city. I was living in Mumbai, and then moved to Pune. I started teaching Angular. I made good money by teaching. I mean, of course, I was struggling financially, so it helped me. It helped me to actually buy some stuff for my family. I remember buying my first bed after I started teaching, and then there was a time I started. I got a good job at a bank in India, and then thought okay. I mean, I think I have made my career out of this technology, and by that time I knew that Angular is an open source and everything. Um, and then I thought let's do something for Angular, right, for the community. But the question was how, because that's the biggest question. I mean, whenever you start thinking about doing something, the first question is how. I mean, and believe me, that was a time not many people were doing open source in India. I mean, if you see the recent report, you will see okay, most number of contributors from India are actually contributing to open source, but that was not the reality back in days.
Right.
And then I remember going to Angular repository, and then I saw top 100 contributors, which they generally display. Um, and then I thought there was no one from India, and I promised myself that I will do it. I will be the first one, and that was the whole motivation. And then a year went by. Believe me, I mean,
Yeah.
I was looking for ways how to do it, and there was no one in India. I mean, I was not even aware where the community is, who can help me. I was not active on Twitter. I mean, I had no idea like what Twitter is. I mean, I used to just hear in news like, okay, some celebrity posted this, that,
Right,
but I
right.
never like. So I was not even there. So and then around 2019, uh, things got settled, and then I said, okay, let's start exploring more ways. And then I came across a conference. I went there and met some folks from the Anglo community. I even met Vikram, who used to work for Angular team now. I think he's moved to another team, but he used to work at in Angular team at that point of time. And then I asked him like, how can I contribute to Angular? So he said, yeah, you can write blog posts, create content. I was like, no, I want to actually contribute on the GitHub repository. And I was like,
Right, right.
yeah, you can actually help us with documentation. We have so many things to do. And I said, like, okay, documentation, that's something I think I can do. I mean, I have been teaching Angular, I have been doing Angular. And
Right.
I think Angular documentation has space for improvement. And then I came back home, started looking for issues, and then I couldn't find any. And because, of course, believe me, it's not possible that you go to a repository on day one and then you start doing open source. It's not possible, even for
Yeah.
experienced developers. I'm not talking about even freshers, right? Forget about it. If you're just someone who's starting, forget about it. I mean, even experienced developers cannot do this. So I went to another repository for NGRX, and I picked up an issue because I was doing something similar in my project. I was exploring something similar, what the issue was, and then I ended up doing my first PR for NGRX, and then I went back to Angular repository. I actually started. The strategy what I applied is I went to the repository, Angular repository, subscribed to the repository, like all the notifications, and I started getting mails. So whenever there is someone who's raising an issue, so I used to read through them. I was like, okay, let's see if I can do this, and then
Right.
of course, eventually there was a time I was like, okay, this there was a documentation change, and then I was like, okay, let's do this, and that's how I started doing it for even Angular.
All right, that's an interesting process, and the fact that you said that even the experienced developers, it's not like you can just go into a repo and just start contributing. Um, that's a little bit disheartening for new developers, if you will. If you consider that you have to wait about a year or whatever time it takes you to like find the right project, find the right issue to get started with. And even then, it might be like a small change or documentation changes, which developers tend to think that it's not really open source because you're not writing code, you're not adding new features or things like that. So, um, uh, are there any? So now that was a while ago. You started a while ago. Are there any new tools, sites, resources now that make that process a little bit easier, or is the state of open source the same in the sense of how to get started?
Believe me, I mean there are so many tools. I mean tools, and as well as there are like uh, there are websites which can help you. For example, first time contributors, if you search for it, there is a website where you can go ahead like try like how you can contribute to open source. And if you ask about tooling, of course it has improved a lot. I mean, I started in 2019 and it was pain to actually just run Angular on your machine, and the Angular repository. It's a very big repository, right? Or
Yeah.
let's talk about any other project. So you have to clone it, then you have to install on your machine, and then if you're doing like 10 or 5 or 10 different projects, you have to clone all of them on your machine, run it, build it. Then came code spaces. I mean, GitHub really changed the way we used to contribute to open source. The code spaces made the life more easier. So it's free for open source, right? So you can just go ahead and create a new code space and just start doing your changes, start building stuff. So it has like the time to contribute or open a new PR that has increased or decreased, sorry, not increased, but it has decreased by a very large amount, I would say. Because I remember just trying to figure out, okay, how to run this repository on my local machine for 2 hours and
Right.
like end up for the day. But now in two hours, I can just probably raise a PR. So tooling has increased. I mean, there are enough resources now because now as I said, like thanks to some of those influencers who keep talking about, okay, contribute to open source, contribute to open source. Yeah, I mean, they are doing some harm as well. As I said, they are also increasing the FOMO among developers, right? That, oh, I should do this because I'm missing this, but you're not. Believe me, I mean, it's okay if you don't do open source, but thanks to them, there are also enough resources now.
That's fair. That's fair. We might then like add some links on the show notes for some of those resources.
Yes.
Going back to your background, what would you say is the most memorable, the best contribution that, at least from your point of view, right? The one that you enjoy the most. What would that be?
I mean, I remember like getting when my first PR was merged, of course, for NGRX and Angular. Of course, that was something which I liked, of course, personally. But I think most memorable moment would be when Brandon Roberts, the creator of NGRX, or not the creator, but yeah, the maintainer of NGRX, he was doing like NGConf talk. Like, so NGRX team all presents there every year, and my name was there. So I remember like I was sitting in my office, and um, I was just looking at the tweets because, of course, NGConf, I couldn't afford to visit NGConf. So, and then I was looking at the tweets, and suddenly found my name there, and I was so excited. I was like, my manager used to sit behind me, and like, hey, see, there is my name in the latest conference which is happening in United States, and he was like, okay, yeah, that's really nice. I was like pulling every one of my friend, and I was like showing them, what, see that there is my name, and I was
I'm on
so
TV. I'm
excited.
on
I was like,
TV.
because I was not expecting it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that feeling, right? Yeah. So because I was not expecting it, I mean, to be frank, I mean, I was enjoying it. I was enjoying doing open source because I was doing it with like I was really passionate about it. I was like, okay, I haven't done in anything for community in like 10 or 11 years of my career. This is like first time I'm doing it, and people started recognizing me. I mean, that was good stuff. And then suddenly getting my seeing my name there, I was like, oh wow. And then the other instance was, I think it was after Angular 8 was released, so I built a small utility for Angular and Netlify. So it was a kind of CLI where you can deploy your Angular app on Netlify using the CLI itself.
Okay.
And then Minko actually mentioned my name and one of my friend who is Johannes. He lives in Germany. Of course, we knew each other, uh, but like Minko mentioned both of our names in the interview. So that was another like really amazing feeling I had. Like, okay, someone like from Angular team knows that Santosh, there is a guy now named
Right.
Santosh who exists. Them.
Nice. Nice. And yeah, I can imagine that because you're a lot of people, and you included, you're spend your own time contributing to a project, and sometimes that contribution goes unnoticed, or at least appreciated by the maintainers, but nothing else. So a public recognition, again, I can imagine how that felt. Nice. um, Understanding how to get started is key, but what are reasonable expectations to have out of the interaction with open source? Essentially, if I'm a new developer looking at
Mhm.
the open source hype, let's call it that, online, and seeing how a lot of people are, you included, are contributing to this, um, what would be reasonable expectations to have? And let's break the myth of I'm gonna be famous overnight because I suddenly contribute to a big open source project. So what are the reasonable expectations to have when you get started with open source?
And, of course, there was a recent, what you can say, drama on Twitter that, okay, should you do open source to just get a job? And of course, like there should be an expectation of why you're doing it, but I'm not sure. Like I'm not totally on board like doing open source just for getting a job. I mean,
Absolutely.
because when I started doing it, it was more of a passion. I mean, I was passionate about open source because I wanted to help the community grow. I was like, okay, let's say, I mean, if, once I start, probably more people will see me, and then they will also do the same path, right? And then it will help open source. So my intention was not to get a job or to become a celebrity or become famous, which of course I'm not. Uh, but my focus was more about like it helped me in some ways, right? I mean, I made money. I mean, I made a living. I started making good money because of open source, and I should give back. That was my intention, and I think if you have that kind of intention, you will go far. What why I'm saying this? Like if you see there are developers who just do it for probably getting a job or yeah some other intentions, or there are some developers who just do it so they can like insert a backdoor someday, right? So recent exit util thing. So that's also true.
Yeah,
But if you see with the intention of helping the community, we'll go far. I mean, it's been 5 years. Like I started doing raised my first PR like in 2019 and it's 2024. The one reason I'm able to do it is because I'm still passionate about it. Yes, of course, I'm not able to like do much as I used to, like the open source contribution part. Like, but I'm trying to do some other stuff, right? That was the time I was just doing open source. I mean, still, I whenever I get time, I try to help some of the projects in my free time, and I can do that only because of course I'm still passionate about it. I just don't want to do it because I wanted to get a job. It eventually led me to this, like eventually led me to have like become GDE, become GitHub Star, or to get a good job. I mean, I'm in Germany, right? Just because people knew me, and they
right.
knew that okay, there is a guy Santosh who is doing something for him. That was not the goal, but it eventually happened. My goal is still like giving back to the community. I think that's the open source what you can say motivation which you should have. I mean, most of the maintainers or most of the open source developers, they are doing it because they are passionate about it. They're passionate to build something new. They're passionate to help the community grow, and that's why they're still doing it. I mean, just take an example of Ivanu, right? I mean, he started Vue.js, still doing it, uh, but he made that community grow so much that now there are 10 different people who are actually doing 10 different stuff in the community. I mean, if you see Anthony Fu, or Daniel Rowe, so they are like, they're taking care of wheat, nuts, and they are doing it because they're passionate about it.
That's fair. No, definitely. I think that what you describe is like the ideal open source mindset, like just doing it to contribute back. Like you said, I benefited so much from open source. I just want to give back to the community. Um, so that's definitely a good advice to just get into it, wanting to add value and to contribute back, not to get something out of that interaction. Um, what would you say are some of the biggest myths around open source?
Probably, I mean, one of the biggest myth, of course, which people keep talking about like a lot about is getting a job. I
Yeah.
mean, probably, let's say you see probably 10, 20 people who got the job, right? And that's why you get motivated and then start doing it. But those 20 people were actually really passionate about it. So it's not only about getting job. They got the job because they were passionate. So if you're coming from like getting motivated in a wrong way, that's of course not the right thing to do. And the second thing is it's easy.
Right.
I still don't believe like why so many people are there who are saying the open source contribution is easy. I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying to be, because I'm someone who did it and I know that it's hard. And then there are people who are saying it's easy. That's bullshit. I mean, don't go like don't like go with what they say. It's really not an easy thing to do. So if you're doing it, I mean, it's a great achievement. I mean, you should be proud of it. But don't tell others that it's easy. I mean, you know the reality that it's not
Right.
easy, but you're still saying it's easy, which is wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's true that a lot of people online are claiming that getting started with open source is easy. It's just a matter of doing X and Y and that's it. But yeah, you spend like a year trying to get into it, and after 5 years, you still consider it like hard. Does it get easier with time for you now that you're doing it, or like joining a new project, or contributing to a new project, not the same one that you've been, but let's say you want to pick a new project. Is it a little bit easier, or you have to go through all the trouble again of spending some time getting to know the repo, getting to know the issues they have, and so on, until you finally are able to contribute?
Of course, like every if you see every projects, they might have different kind of setups, right? I mean, or different kind of processes. For example, there are projects who will say, okay, you have to squash your commits, or you have to always rebase. Those are the things which you learn over the time. I mean, one good thing which happened to me, I learned a lot about Git when I started contributing to Angular, and so I know like what different kinds of Git commits or Git commands which I have to run on different projects. But setting up a project, as I said, like thanks to code spaces, it has become much easier thing to do now. But if you're saying, okay, if I have a new project, I mean, it really depends, like it, like how experienced I am, right? So, for example, the latest PR was for Backstage, so it was just to replace what you can say, prettier utility or ESLint utility, and I saw that thing, and then I have been doing all this upgrades and everything, right? So I'm maintaining a big open source, or not big open source, but even enterprise project where I do all this version upgrades and everything. So I thought, okay, why not to do this?
Right.
Because there are not many people who are aware of how to probably do all these upgrades. Probably, if you see, those are the things which mostly are done by the maintainers because they know their repository. But if I was like, okay, this, I think I can do it because I've been doing it for a long time. So I took it, even though I don't have like much idea about what Backstage is. I mean, of course, I read a little bit because it's used in our organization. We use Backstage,
Okay.
and I was like, okay, if you're using it, why not to just contribute back? And then I opened the PR. I mean, it really depends. I mean, like this is something which you can do with the experience, like not on day one you go to 10 different repositories and then you are able to like contribute to all 10 repositories. You cannot, right? So over the years, like navigating through different issues on the open source, and then you realize, okay, this is something which seems similar. Because if you see, like JavaScript ecosystem is so big, right? There are like
Yeah.
millions of packages on npm, and not everyone is updated to the latest version. So if you are someone who has experience like upgrading dependencies, that's also a huge asset to open source. You can just go ahead and check if there are any projects who needs this help. Keeping the tooling updated. For example, I mean, there was a shift which happened between Webpack to Vite, right? So there were people who were just using Webpack, and then Vite came in. People started replacing it with Vite, but there was limited knowledge, right? Not everyone knew Vite. So if you're someone who has experience, I mean, you can also do that. I'm sure there are still a lot of projects who might be struggling because they don't have expertise upgrading all these dependencies. I mean, that's one way to do it. Or like let's say Angular, like who React, they also keep upgrading their version, but that's pressure on the maintenance as well, right? And if you have experience doing that, upgrading dependencies, upgrading projects to latest version, that's also a good thing to do. Another thing which is very important is, as I said, documentation, right? So of course, all these frameworks, technologies keep changing, but
Yeah.
many of them have like skill set to write about it. You mentioned, right? I mean, people always think that okay, coding is only way to contribute. It's not. I
Yeah.
mean, of course, keeping the talks updated is a great way to help the community. I mean, if you're someone who's good writer, just go ahead and do that. Like write to talk about the new API which has changed or new API which is added. So those are the things. Yeah, I think once you start contributing, you will find these are similar issues across many
Right.
repositories, and then you can help as much as you can.
That's great advice. All right. And is there a thing such as open source burnout? Do you, or have you felt it at one point? And from your face, I can see that the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I mean, believe me, first time it happened, and I was like, I didn't realize it. I was like, why this is happening? I was like, and then I realized, okay. Then I spoke to some of my friends, and like, dude, you are going through burnout. I think you should take a break.
Right.
I think it was all started in I think July or August of 2019 for the first time. I mean, uh, so I was doing open source so much, right? I was like doing, I used to like do my job, come back home, and then start working from 11 p.m. until 3 a.m. So that was my schedule. And then wake up early in morning, like not early, but still 8 a.m.
Hmm.
and then be ready for office. The good thing was that was the period when I was working for the bank and then they had no projects. And my manager was really fine if I want to work from home, if I want to come to office or not.
Okay.
But of course, once you get that freedom, you should not exploit it,
Right.
right? So I don't want you to even exploit that freedom. And so, of course, I kept doing this. And then there was a point of time I realized that I'm started getting fat, I'm started getting sick, and I don't want to do things anymore. And then it was so bad. I mean, then I said, okay, let's take a step back. I mean, I have, but yeah, you never learn, right? So I have like so far I have like 3 burnouts
Oh wow.
in 3 years, and then last year I stepped back. So last year was so I was so close to getting a burnout because I was traveling a lot. I mean, this was of course uh, giving like traveling to conferences. So I was like I traveled to 13 conferences last year, and I was and then I said, okay, no, if I continue doing this, I will just go into another
Yeah.
burnout, which will not be good for my career as well, because I have a full-time job, and it's not only the open source thing, right, or the community thing which
Absolutely.
I'm doing. So I decided to take a step back this time, and that paid off. I mean, in last 4 months, I have just been to only one conference. I was about to be in another, but I got sick. So it's good. I'm recovering. I think probably I'll be able to do more next year. Uh, and if I'm healthy, I mean, I'll be able to do it more. So yeah, take care of yourself. I mean, don't push yourself a lot, even though you're enjoying it. I mean, that's the thing, right? Once you start enjoying something, you don't know, like when you reach that stage
Right.
where you have burnout.
Yeah. It's danger if you don't pace yourself and think about other things as well and do other things. Absolutely. Let's talk about getting into open source again, but not how, but rather if there are like a set of minimum skills that you need to get started with contributing to open source. Are there any? Do you need a few years of experience as a developer? Can someone fresh, new into the profession, get into the habit of contributing to open source? What would you say to that?
Uh, I generally talk about two separate set of people who can contribute to open source. Like there are people who have some years of experience working in IT industry. Getting started for them, it's actually a low effort because if you see, like everyone is using npm or NuGet or let's say Maven, Gradle, whatever. And as of today, I mean, the time has changed. If I go 10 years back, there was not enough open source. I mean,
Right.
people used to just write code in their project and they were not using anything from
Yeah.
outside apart from JavaScript, of course. But now it's like available in all the ecosystem. So at the end, every developer who is out there is actually using some of the open source projects. So they know like how to use this API, right? I mean, if you're using an open source project, you know how to use it. And that's your chance. So let's say if I'm using 10 different open source projects in my repository or in my project, I mean, you can actually go through them. Let's say if you get some issue, like working while working, or you see some limitations on those APIs, you can just go ahead and talk to the maintainer, right? I mean, you can just recommend them, okay, this is something which I saw limitation. Even not, I'm saying not directly contributing to code, but start contributing in some helpful ways. For example, answering some question. Because if you see maintainers, they have burnout because of like there might be only 10 bugs, but there are like thousands of questions to which people because people don't know how to use it. I mean that's where you can also use it as an experienced dev answering those questions on Stack Overflow, or if you see some discussion going on the GitHub discussion or issues, you can help there. You can like go through the bugs. Like if if someone is seeing some bugs, you can actually help them debug because you're already using that library inside your work.
Right.
Take some time. Like you don't have to set up everything. You just need to just go through the code base, just add a debugger, and you will be able to figure out and then start recommending features, start recommending changes like how the API should be designed. And at the end, if you feel comfortable, just ask maintainers. I mean, believe me, the open source maintainers really appreciate this kind of people, and they will be able to take the extra step and help them personally. I mean, that's what happened with me when I started contributing to NGRX. So
Yeah.
you can just have like some calls and then see like how you can like do your first contribution, or first make your first contribution to that project, because you have been already valuable, right? uh, or uh, you build something in your personal project, or let's say if you build something, some utility in your work project, and you think that that will be useful for others, just create an open source library and publish it down, right? So you, because you already know those stuff. But there is this other set of people who are just getting started.
Yeah.
I would recommend not to jump into open source. Learn, but the first is learn on your craft, right? Let's figure out what you want to do. I know there are people like who are who were like freshers. Like I interviewed one of my friend Anurag, who is like into TypeScript, and I was interviewing him back in 2019 and asked him like where you work, and he said I'm still a college student, and he had like so amazing TypeScript knowledge. He still has. I mean, if I have questions probably for with TypeScript, I'll generally tag him. Probably he's your guy. I mean, he should be able to do it. And he has been helping community since he was in college. I mean, that didn't happen in a day. Of course, as a student, he was working on that craft, right? He was building that skill set that he can contribute to open source. And then he ended up creating some open source projects, and which got like 30, 40,000 stars. So that happens like with the time. It's not like you he started doing on day one and he
Yeah.
became an expert in TypeScript. He gave some time, he learned it, and then he started doing open source, and then he started getting some recognition, and then he became famous for what he's doing. So take your time. I mean, as I said, right, the problem is those influencers who are saying it's easy to get started with open source. Problem is not new developers. I mean, they are just following the crowd. If you remember the recent drama about Express.js, like people started adding, started doing, going to README and just adding their name. But they were just spamming the repository because one of the YouTubers showed them how to do it.
Right.
And that was bad, right? That's
Yeah.
bad for everyone. That's bad for the entire open source community. And that's bad for maintenance. I really like I can really understand the hard time maintenance go whenever this Hacktoberfest happens, or whenever this kind of goof up happens from one of the content creators or content creators.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not how you contribute. That's actually the opposite of what we've been discussing. Instead of wanting to give back to the community, that's just you trying to get something back out of it for free. All right, we're just wrapping up. I want to know what you think about the future of open source. If you can guesstimate where is it going, how relevant is it going to be for our industry? Is it going to keep growing on relevancy? Do you think it's going away? Is there a trend here? What do you think?
Open source is not going anywhere. I mean, I still see the future, because there are so many projects or so many organizations who are actually relying on open source for their own innovation as well. And now, over the last few years, I mean, open source has gone commercial as well, right? There are some companies who are doing open source first and
Sure.
then doing commercial license behind that. So, uh, yeah, I mean, the only problem is, of course, the biggest question is still funding, which is a which is an issue. But I would see, I'm also seeing that there are effort being made from other people in the community to fill this gap. For example, there is GitHub sponsors which came in,
Yeah.
right? So we already had Open Collective, but of course it has some issues. So GitHub sponsors came in to fill that gap. But there are more companies which are coming. And for example, we interviewed the CEO of Polar SH. I'm not sure if you saw that project, but
No.
they also are for open source maintainers. So you can join as an open source maintainer, and uh, like Polar will like communicate this to with the enterprises that okay, you are using this open source projects, and we can connect you to the maintainer, so you can help them. Uh, and that is the gap which Polar is now trying to fill it. And of course, last year at GitHub's Universe, we also had the chance to speak to sponsors team. They also they're also working on it. It's not like they just made something and they stopped. So they are
Right.
also trying to innovate the ways by using which maintainers can like make more money, or at least make a living if they're doing it full time.
Yeah. That's sort of the dream for a lot of developers, right? I mean, trying to live off of your own open source projects and work on whatever you want. But definitely, it's a huge gap that the open source space has right now. And it's, that also, and that's a personal note, but that's also like why I admire so much the whole open source movement, because it's like a key part of our industry. Like you said, a lot of enterprises rely on open source, and a lot of these developers are doing it for free. It's, I haven't seen that many industries, other type of industries that have this type of collaboration, with each other for nothing essentially. So it's amazing. But anyway, that's me rambling. So let's just close the episode on your last recommendation. What would be like the advice for new developers from you regarding open source?
uh, do it like if you're passionate about it. I mean, you will go along with. Don't do it just because of money or because of the motivation to get a job. You will get it. I mean, I'm not saying you will not get it. I mean, until like we also have two sides of the story. Of course, there are open source developers who are struggling to make living if they are doing it full time, but there are developers who are also able to do it. I mean, if not a job, maybe there are other ways to make money. For example, you can do consulting. Of course, you will be a huge asset as a consultant to any companies, and there are companies who pay shitload of money. I mean, believe me, when I'm saying shitload of money, I mean they do to some ex- uh, consultants who are like who really have an expertise in doing all this thing, right? You just need to, yeah, be vocal about it. I mean, for example, I know NGET's team, they also run this is what to say, so paid trainings. So they also do paid trainings, or so there are different ways to make money. I mean, it really depends like how passionate you are about that particular project. It can become big. For example, Curl, right? Curl started in probably 80s, and still like not now every device in the world probably has Curl installed. And of course, like there are enough probably people who might be supporting that project, and there are companies who rely on this. So of course they
That's
might be
true.
paying you money if you're good in doing that stuff. So the point is, of course, you will make money in some way possible, uh, but don't have that intention to like, okay, I just
Right.
want to make money, that's why I'm here. So intention should be to help people, or to help the community grow. And that's only my last words.
All right. That's great advice. Thank you. All right. That's it, folks. That's the end of the episode. Thank you, Santosh, again for your time, for being here, for sharing all your background and all that insight. So please tell our audience where they can find you if they want to reach out, get to know more of your work, and get to know you. That's it.
And just go to santoshyadav.dev and you will be able to find all my social media handles. I'm generally active on Twitter and LinkedIn, uh, and you can always reach out on there.
All right. Awesome. We'll make sure to add those links on the show notes. Thank you again, Santosh. It was great having you, and that's it. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And that was it for this episode of the Scripting Them podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you can find me online on Twitter at TheDeepMan123, and you can also find the podcast YouTube channel just searching for the Scripting Them on YouTube. Thank you again, and catch you on the next one.